Welcome to SoulPod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. I'm your guide, Crystal Cassidy, and together we will bridge the seen and the unseen, science and spirituality, the practical and the profound. From quantum physics to energy centers, near-death experiences to extraterrestrial contact, join us as we delve into the mysteries of consciousness and journey together towards a more awakened, compassionate, and soul-connected world. Find your seat, drop in, and let's go on a journey together. Welcome back, light beings, to another episode of the Soul Podcast. We are going to dive into the science of spirituality today, and I'm joined with Kat Mansfield. Welcome, Kat.
Hey.
So, to dive into this topic, when we talk about the science of spirituality, one of the questions that I often think about is why even have this conversation around the science of spirituality? Why do we want to understand what's going on in our bodies and in our minds when it comes to meditation and other modalities? How does science support spirituality, and how does spirituality support science, if at all? And so just wanted to kind of explore that question first, Kat. So from your perspective, how do science and spirituality intermingle? Do they intermingle? How do you view it?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I remember when I first found meditation, or when meditation first found me, it was about the same time because I was introduced to a lot of this world through Joe Dispenza. And so I was also learning a lot about the science behind it, like a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, our brainwave states, neuroplasticity. It was at the same exact time that meditation found me. And I remember just this feeling of empowerment and how this knowledge had the capacity to fortify my practice in a way that, had I not been introduced to the science, it would have been so much more of an esoteric, ethereal, kind of out here understanding of what's going on. But being able to pair the two worlds, being able to, again, fortify my practice with the understanding of, again, some of the things we're going to get into today, it felt like it just exponentially increased the potency of what I was able to achieve. And so I think that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about having this conversation, is because I know that there's so much potential for it to amplify and magnify somebody's practice. What about you? What's it
I
been
love
like for
that.
you?
Amplify and magnify somebody's practice. I totally agree. For anyone that knows me, you know I'm a big nerd. I love the science. And it really was my first love, or my first kind of area that I was very drawn to. When I was really little, I thought I was going to be a marine biologist, like many young people. But as I got into university, I studied biochemistry. I was super lucky to work with a well-known toxicologist in college. And so I interned with him and got exposed to clinical research and how we identify novel molecules for treatments. And then I got into pharmaceutical development and cancer research and genomic diagnostics. So the science world has been a big part of my life, and it's served me in so many amazing ways. And it's so interesting to me because that side of my brain, the analytical, the logical, is pretty strong. And as I got deeper into my spiritual journey, I always am I have a deep curiosity about how things work. And I think science helps to explain, like, okay, this is happening in my body, this is happening in my mind, why? And through answering those questions, I think, to your point, it helps to fortify the practice as not only important, effective, and supported by observation, by data. Um, but I think it can make it more accessible for people who need that. They need that validation. They need that social proof through the science world. And as I started to have mystical experiences, I was just so determined to figure out, okay, why is this happening? How can this be happening? Because if we answer those questions, if we can answer those questions, I think it helps us to answer more around the nature of our reality and why we're here. I think it's all interconnected. So I really enjoy this intersection of science and spirituality for that reason. And it opens up so many possibilities.
Yeah, and it really feels like it's our human nature to be inquisitive, right? Like we are incarnate in this human body. And so everything that we experience in meditation and in these mystical experiences, like that is truth. And I feel like when I've experienced that, I've always known that to be true. Like I haven't needed to turn to the science to validate that experience. I've always just like known like this is more true than anything else that I've ever, can even touch in this 3D realm. Like this, I know is true. And now that there is so much science, it's so much more accessible and, you know, accredited and what's the word? Accepted to more people, which makes again this practice just something that all of us can access and can understand, and can kind of put that meaning to, like you're saying, like these mystical experiences. We can start to understand like what's really happening in our brain, what's really happening in our body, how can we recreate this? And like I said, I've always thought that that's more true than anything else, but for the people who need that validation, it's like it's there. We have it.
Yeah, we have it.
Yeah.
We may not have had it 20, 30 years ago. There's been absolutely amazing strides, and I really credit the scientific community with taking an interest in understanding what's going on in meditation, what's going on in breath work, and also, as we'll get into a little bit today, what's going on with consciousness. What is consciousness? Because the journey of your spiritual development really is a journey into understanding consciousness and how it manifests and how we're a conduit for it. And what does that mean? So they're deeply entangled, a word we'll also get into more later. But to your point, I think you bring up something also important, which is, do you need the science in order to validate the spiritual experience? And I know there's many people that don't, because as you said, when you have these experiences, when you're exploring through your own journey, the knowing that you talk about is, in my mind, just as important as, if not more important, than the data, than the science. I think sometimes we forget that personal experience, personal observation is a data point. It
Hmm.
is a method of observation, if you will, for the science world. So it's extremely valid, it's extremely important. And if we look at all those data points of personal experience through the spiritual journey, that paints a really powerful picture as well. In some ways that we don't yet have answers for on the science side. So there's mystery in both worlds. I think this is important to mention. There's mystery in both worlds. Science is constantly coming up with new hypotheses and testing them in the ways that we have available to us in the human form in this reality. And I also think on the spiritual journey, you're trying out new modalities, you're going into new areas of your mind, and you're seeing what's there. So in my mind, both worlds are balanced in that there is mystery in both. And
Hmm.
so if there is mystery in both, that means that there's possibility in both. And we can really balance the kind of analytical, the logical, and the mystical and the nonlinear. And there was, I'll share this because I was nerding out on it recently. There was a physicist in the early 1900s, Georges Lemaitre. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. But he's a scientist that came up with the Big Bang theory, basically the primordial atom of creation. And I didn't know this, he was a Belgian Catholic priest and a physicist and a mathematician. Um, so he was very much in both worlds, the spiritual world or religious world and the science world. And he said something that I thought was really cool. He said that these are both paths to knowing, that religious texts don't necessarily purport to be scientific text. And we're not necessarily looking to science to be a path to liberation. So it's like, if you think about those two worlds in that way, it's like, oh, they're both just paths to knowing. And
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. It's kind of reminding me of a few episodes ago, you brought up the sphere of truth, and it feels like science and spirituality kind of exist on different sides of that sphere, but still make up the sphere, you know? And so we have the opportunity, even in meditation, to kind of zoom out and move around this sphere, you know, and look through different lenses at the same truth.
Yeah. Just two different ways of knowing, both
Hmm.
important.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Other sides of the sphere. So we can dive in a little bit. So we can talk a bit about the brain and meditation. So there has been so much advancement in fMRI studies, especially in the last decade, 2 decades. And so we're starting to really we're starting to better understand why meditation is so great for us from a physiological perspective and how it can literally change and um, allow us to develop more capabilities in our brains, which in the latter half of the last century, the thought was that you came into the world with a certain number of neurons and you were stuck with them. And if you messed up and, weren't treating your brain the way that maybe you should, that you're knocking off those neurons one by one and you weren't able to build them back. We now know that that's not true. There's this amazing process of neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So we can dive in there. Kat, what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Oh, I love neuroplasticity. I feel like everybody's just like get out of jail free card in this lifetime, you know?
Really?
It's like, yeah, it's just like
You can always change. Literally, we know this because our brains can
totally.
change.
Yeah, and it's so empowering. It's so empowering to know that you can take responsibility for your brain. You can take responsibility for what is wiring and what is firing, you know, and what pathways we're choosing to put energy towards and to deepen, and which ones we're willing to let essentially dissipate in our brain. So yeah, I think neuroplasticity is one of the uh, just like most freeing concepts for us to really start with. And I think when it comes to meditation, something we want to also touch on in neuroplasticity is this notion of altered states versus altered traits, right? And what we're doing in meditation is we're reaching altered states. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can create this sustainable change in our brain, so that we can transform from the inside and see that transformation projected into our outside world. So when we're moving into these altered states, essentially moving through changing our brainwave state, we're again, so neuroplasticity is that ability like to increase the malleability of our brain, to fire and wire different neural pathways so that we can create new neural networks that support the beliefs, that support the paradigms that we want to exist in, as opposed to old neural networks that may be reactive and firing in the same belief system and paradigm of our old wounds, our old beliefs, our old ways of existing. And so we're given this opportunity to, as we're talking about, just completely change the makeup of our brain. And what that does is it transforms the way that we project our reality. We're now believing different things, our paradigms have shifted, and so thus our perception of reality and all of our experiences shifts as well. And so it just is that like the foundational element to transformation. And so why don't you go contribute to kind of your perspective of
Mm.
neuroplasticity before we get into the brainwave
Oh my gosh,
breakdown?
it's so fun.
So fun. I
I
know.
could talk about this all
I'm
day.
like, pass the mic to Crystal.
No, I love that. I think you really hit on something powerful there, which is, beliefs are just thoughts that we continue to think. And so when we take that concept and we apply it to the brain, like you're talking about, we can think of those beliefs are those tracks of neural activity that we have in our brains as being representative of our beliefs and the way that we make sense of the world. And the amazing thing that we now know, both about psychedelics and also meditation, is that when we do these practices, I love this analogy or this metaphor, which is that these tracks are made in the snow. So if you can imagine like a bunch, like you've walked to this track over and over again. There's a path through the snow, you've cleared it out, and so it's the easiest path for you to walk down in your mind. It's clear, you know where it goes, and it's been traveled so many times through the thought that it's created a path, which is the belief. And the cool thing about meditation is that it's almost like bringing in a snow shower and you get a fresh blanket of snow all over the lands of your mind. And then that path may still be there. It's still there, but it's a little less distinct. And you can choose, is that a path I want to continue to walk down in my mind? Do I want to continue to fortify that belief? Or do I want to start to carve a new belief in my mind, a new line of thought that maybe serves me better? And so for me, when we kind of tie this concept of neuroplasticity to the experience of meditation, I think that's one of the kind of powerful takeaways. It's like, okay, we now know that our brains have the ability to regenerate and create new neural pathways, which is amazing. To your point, it gives us such an opportunity for transformation. It is the foundation of transformation. This is what we're actually doing in our brains when you meditate. We're actually rewiring and refiring these pathways in new ways. And so, for me, to your point about responsibility, there's increased choice because now you don't have to continue to walk that path. And as you build awareness of that path, of that train of neurons, you can start to choose differently. And for me in meditation, the practical implication of that is, okay, I'm aware of that belief, I'm aware of those thoughts. Do I want to continue to wire and fire in that way, or do I want to choose something new? So it's such a cool realization and discovery about our brains that can serve us in so many ways.
Yeah, I love that visual of the snow, and I think anyone listening, this process of neuroplasticity, it's not an easy one, you know? We're legitimately carving new pathways in the brain. You know, it's not easy. And so the repetition that meditation as a practice offers, it plops you down right at the fork in those two paths in the snow, where one there's a fresh blanket and this one's a little bit less deep in the snow now. And this is where you have the opportunity. You can either turn to the left, make a new neural pathway, or keep going in your old neural pathway. And so each each time you sit down to practice, you're given a new opportunity to create a new pathway, a new belief. And I think, again, just how difficult that is, because we do have a default mode network, and our default mode network is all of the neural pathways that have been firing for decades for most of us. And until we bring that consciousness to the beliefs, to the paradigms that are creating our reality, until we bring that, we are operating from our default mode network for our entire lives. And that's what's running the show. And so going in, and whether, yeah, be through psychedelics, meditation, the two together, it gives us that opportunity. It's the vehicle to zoom out and really take inventory of where we've been walking the same paths, where we've been reinforcing and fortifying those same beliefs, those same grooves. And each time we meditate, each time we come back to presence, it's that opportunity to choose something different. And it's not easy. So just know that. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's work and
You're shoveling the
worth it.
snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and
It's
it gets easier once you start to build that new pathway. The grooves get deeper, and that becomes your new default mode network. That new groove that you've created becomes the path of least resistance for your brain. And so it gets easier, but that beginning of digging the first part into the earth, yeah, that's the hard part, but then it gets easier. So keep going.
yeah, yeah, the nature of transformation. Yeah, that's such a good point that it takes work and to generate these new neurons, these new energetic relationships between cells in your brain. It takes intention, that concept of where your focus goes is where your energy goes. I think also applies to this concept that we're talking about. Is where your focus goes is where your new neural pathways are being paved. This is where you're digging the snow, you're clearing the snow, you're walking that path over and over again to create a new journey in your mind, a new experience in your life. And it's so exciting. So let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics in the brain that can be in we'll say okay. We can talk about some of the specifics in the brain that will be impacted with meditation, and then what's the practical experience, at least from our experience in meditation, based on these findings. So one of them is that our higher order functions, which is in the prefrontal cortex, we can see additional gray matter forming in that area of the brain. And so this has to do with our ability to do what we need to do in our lives, to reason. And this is kind of like the executor in your mind, the person making the decisions and taking the actions. This area can get amplified. So in my experience of meditation, I think it's interesting to think about this because it seems like the more that I am centered, the more that I meditate, the clearer I am on what it is I need to do in my life. And I wonder if that experience of meditation is related to the neuroplasticity, the neurogenesis in the prefrontal cortex. I don't know for sure, but my hypothesis is that maybe that's what's going on, is that you have an increased ability to know what it is that you need to do to process information in a way that's not overcrowded with all of the other, we could say, default mode network type of thinking. The front of your mind is becoming just more and more clear. There's less and less mind wandering, which is the default mode network of the brain. So what do you think about that, Kat?
Yeah, I think what I notice as well, after having, been a long time meditator, is my ability to focus, my ability to maintain focus on one task, to the point where it's like pleasurable to be focusing for a long time, to move through a single task without in noticing how my brain wants to be there, wants to stay focused. And if it does wander, it comes back and it feels good. I think that's one of the biggest things and changes I've noticed. And similarly, there's a decrease in matter in the amygdala, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is like our fear center, our
hmm
where we catastrophize. And how that's shown up for me is when I do find myself in those places, or if even I wake up and I feel a little bit more on the like anxiety end of the spectrum, just like when we wake up and you're just like, ooh, things are feeling,
Crunchy.
yeah,
Yeah.
crunchy, and some of those just like first thoughts that come in or like are are a lot, or are confronting. In those moments, my ability to come back to center, my ability to regulate and move out of that space of fear, of doom, of catastrophizing is so much easier and so much more streamlined. And it feels like my rebound is so fast. When I find myself there, and it's not from a spiritual bypassy place of like push this down, it doesn't exist, I can't handle it, I can't hold it. It's like, okay, I see this, and from a like the chemicals perspective, it's like I feel this, it's happening, and my ability to zoom out of that and return back to center is so fast, and
Mm.
it's such a gift.
I love that you're touching on this. So the concept of, we could call it resilience, maybe,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the
that's
bounce
a good
back
word. Yeah.
effect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, the ability to focus, I think, is a core element
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
probably what we're seeing in the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
The amplification of that area of the brain and the diminishment of the amygdala and the default mode network.
Mm-hmm.
That makes so much sense from an experiential point of view, from meditating for a long time, is that not only have you rewired those pathways in a way that works for you better in your life, but even if you get off the path in a way that you don't want, that you're
Mm-hmm.
walking and you're like, I don't know where I am
Yeah.
in this this forest of my mind,
Every time I go on a
uh,
hike.
yeah, perpetually lost. But
Yeah.
that's really the experience, I think, sometimes when we have anxiety or an inability to focus, which is a big thing in our current society because we have so much input, we have so much coming at us, that the mind is desperately trying to make sense of it. And in that desperation, the ability to focus can get attacked in some way. And so when you meditate, that's why it's so crunchy and difficult at the beginning, because you're pulling yourself out of the kind of wandering through the forest, not really having any plan or any intention, we can say. And you're starting to direct it towards what you want to focus on. And that is such a powerful, it's hard, it takes some time. But we can also see in studies it doesn't take as much time as you might think. So we know that in 2 months, we start to see these changes in the mind. So this is, I think it's more accessible than maybe some people think to start to make those changes in the brain. And certainly after a year, we see some pretty significant movement in the brain of people who had not meditated, but who are now meditating on a regular basis. So it doesn't take years and years and years and years, but it takes some time and you'll start to see those shifts. But you also talked about the amygdala, which I love to talk about. So this is our fear center. This is our fight, flight, freeze, fawn button in the brain. And what I think can happen, or what we now know does happen through the study of it, is that when the amygdala gets diminished and is becoming less prominent in the brain, then we have this increased resiliency to the fight flight response. So that bar that may have been really low for you before you started meditating starts to rise up a bit. so that it's a higher and higher boundary point to when the nervous system will be triggered into the sympathetic response. And so you can have an increased capacity to stay in the parasympathetic, the rest, digest, heal side. And that when you do go into the sympathetic response, it's serving you, it's serving a purpose. So that's a really cool thing that does happen with the nervous system with meditation.
Yeah, it feels like one of the examples one of my teachers gave us when we're talking about meditation. It was, you know, previously to meditating, you spill a glass of water, and, even that will trigger your amygdala. You'll freak out, you're stressed, you're angry. And now it's like you spill a glass of water, and it's like, I need a towel. You know, it's just like, oh yeah, I just need a
Practical.
towel. Yeah. And it felt so real to me because we're so primed in our culture right now to be reactive, to be easily triggered, to be um yeah, we're just pressing that button of the amygdala, or not even we are, but society in our current culture
Hmm.
is pressing our amygdala, that button, just over and over and over and over
Over
and
and
over
over.
again.
Yeah.
And this practice gives you that, again, ability to zoom out. And it's not the esoteric, it's literally in our mind what's happening. The matter is lessening, so that we are, like you're saying, our threshold expands to be able to hold the sensation of what would have been previously like extremely stressful or triggering or create reaction. Now it's like, oh, that just happened. Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
water spilled. Okay.
Okay. Accepting what is in some ways. I would be, this would, if we could run this experiment, I would be so interested. But if we could look at a society that doesn't have the marketing and the social media engine that our current society does, which there may be ways to actually do this on the planet, and looking at the impact of those systems on the amygdala, on our fear response, we know that that's one way that we get, or the way that we get attention and engagement is through the literal triggering of your sympathetic nervous system. It's interesting to think about how much bigger is our amygdala on
Yeah.
average in our culture because of that,
Yeah.
and that would be so interesting to better understand. But at least we do know that one way to counteract that assault on our fear center is through meditation, is through finding your center, through developing the parasympathetic side of your nervous system. You can counteract that. So I think, given the times and the that we're in, it's becoming more and more clear that this is the antidote really that we need is this work, is meditation, is spirituality,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's a crazy
Agreed.
world out there.
Yes, it is, everyone.
Hang on, you're doing great.
Yeah. Something special happens when we step away from the noise of everyday life and into a space of amplified presence and deep devotion to our spiritual growth. A space where we're seen, supported, and reminded of the light within us. That is exactly what you'll have the chance to do on our SoulPod retreat. We are so excited to invite you on this 4-day immersion in Joshua Tree, California, August 28th through 31st. Specifically designed to illuminate your path and harness the light within. From guided meditations under the stars to transformative breathwork journeys, this is more than a retreat. It's a portal into the next level of you. You'll be held in a sacred container with like-minded souls, moving from the earthly into the mystical, expanding your intuition, deepening into your purpose, and activating your true energetic potential. If you're ready to dive into the mystical with us, join Crystal, myself, and the amazing SoulPod team in the desert, under the stars, in the stillness, and beyond the veil. Head to www.soulpodapp.com/retreat to learn more and book your alignment call. Spaces are limited to just 12 light beings for this journey. So if you feel the call, listen.
So another area of the brain that we can talk about here is the hippocampus. So we know that this area gets lots of additional gray matter during meditation, especially certain types of meditation they're discovering. And this is the center of the brain that's responsible for memory and learning. And I like to think of it as the indexer of the brain. Our memories as an index. And not just learning, but also the emotional component of memory, which is interesting. So, what do you think, Kat, that might mean for our practice?
Mm. Well, I feel like for me, it goes what I notice in my daily life, like it goes hand in hand with that ability to focus because I'm able to hold my attention on one. I even notice like I'm able to read a whole article, as opposed to even not even
The
that long ago.
highlights?
Yeah, not long ago, I'd make it through a couple paragraphs. I'm like, well, I get the gist, or skim it, read the last first sentence, last sentence, and like, I get it. And now sitting down and reading a whole article and being able to, yeah, integrate that information in a way that not only do I feel like I absorbed the information, but I'm able to critically think about it and extract the principles of whatever I read about and apply it to something else. It feels like these are foundational skills that we all have the ability to hone and we all have in a foundational level, but just because of the way that our culture has inundated us with so much noise and so much stimulus, that the ability to not only retain information but kind of first principle think about it, like extract the principles and apply it to any other analogous situation. It feels like that capacity in each of us is just diminishing. And so being able to turn the dial up on yeah, our ability to critically think feels like invaluable at this point in the game.
Hmm. I love that you touched on this, the critical thinking. This is also the executive functioning in our brain, in the ability for us to learn new information. The hippocampus is really, I think, an area where we're rewiring and refiring in whole new ways. And yeah, this focus component I think is so important. The critical thinking. So your mind's ability to critically think becomes more accessible when you're not in fear. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
The
you
amygdala is
see how
being
it's all
diminished.
interwoven. Yeah, the brains working together.
If you're really activated about something, if like we were kind of talking about, we can talk about social media, for example, or an email that you get at work. And if you're activated and you're in your sympathetic nervous system side, then the capacity to access that critical thinking component is going to be harder. So that's why this work to bring the body back into a parasympathetic response, then you're able to access those areas of your brain more efficiently. Because otherwise your body's like, we have an issue here. We need to like divert resources to other areas of the brain and the body
Mhm.
and your blood pressure and your heart rate. And then it's the emphasis in those learning centers is not necessarily going to be as activated, which I think is so important to remember about being able to critically think through something and and go further in your mind and your heart as you do.
I think another way people might be able to practically, live this is like you're saying, when you're faced with a problem and when we're in our amygdala and we're triggered, we have tunnel vision. We have zero capacity to think of solutions. Whereas if we're able to switch back into our parasympathetic nervous system, there's an ability to zoom out, and then there are multiple solutions to any given problem. But again, we're so much of the time existing in that stress state that when something happens, not only are we unable to think of a solution, but it's doomsday. It's one option, tunnel vision, very, which then just increases our stress, increases the the state we're already in. It's this domino effect, cyclical effect. So, because I think that's also something I notice when something comes up. I'm so much more easily able to zoom out and be like, okay, well, we could do this, we could do this, we could da da da. There are five solutions here versus, 3 minutes ago, there were zero.
Yes, the tunnel vision, the funnel of awareness, it gets very narrow when you're activated in the sympathetic. And I love that reminder that, and I think this makes sense given what we know about the brain. As you extend that funnel up and you open up, there's so many more possibilities. And that cognitive function, that executive functioning, that critical thinking, and learning is now accessible. And so we're really training that ability in meditation. And if you're doing it every day, you will start to notice your capacity for learning and for critically thinking and for managing your stress response, and your resiliency will get greatly improved even after a few months. So, memory and emotions. So, I think there's something interesting about the hippocampus in this context. And I wonder, given my experience, that we're starting to rewire some of our memories. And I wonder if the emotions that we associate with certain memories that we've indexed in our minds, I wonder if those can be accessed for our benefit, especially when it's memories that really serve you. You can amplify that emotion in order to access and open your heart space, because I do that quite often in my
Yeah.
practice. And I wonder if it also helps you associate more powerful memories or more powerful emotions with the memories that you're now storing in the hippocampus. This is just my my kind of hypothesis when it comes to the hippocampus, because we know that that's a big area of the brain that is impacted with meditation. And actually, one of my teachers, third generation yogi, he was in an fMRI machine for quite a while, and they studied his practice, and they could see in one session live the hippocampus being activated. So, in a lot of cases, this might not be activations that are happening over longer periods of time, though I think it compounds over time, but it's actually happening like in real time in your brain. And so that's just a really cool thing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I've played with that a little bit in my practice, like especially working with inner child healing, like revisiting memories and basically choosing an emotion to pair with that old memory, and not in a way to like erase the quote unquote reality, but in a way to offer a higher timeline to that same reality that's, existing at the same time, if I want to go there. But you know what I mean? Like,
We
although,
do
yeah,
on the Soul
yeah,
podcast.
yeah, yeah, and just in real time, kind of harmonizing those timelines by offering a higher frequency emotion to my inner child, and it's been really powerful while holding space for what that experience really was, or that emotion was at that time. But yeah, offering another emotion to that and pairing it with that memory has been really powerful in my practice.
Yeah, for me as well. There's something very interesting there about emotions and memory, and how we work with both of those elements in meditation. Yeah, there's something very powerful there.
Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about brainwave states. So
Yeah.
brainwave states, these are electrical frequencies in your brain, in your mind, and they shift depending on what you're experiencing. And as they shift, your experience can shift. And as your experience shifts, your brainwaves shift. So one of the, maybe we can start with high beta. So high beta brain waves, these are pretty fast brain waves. Won't get into all the hertz, but they're
Mhm.
up there. There's one brainwave state we'll talk about, which is even higher. But high beta is usually when we're in a pretty activated state. So it's usually we're maybe a little bit stressed, but we're definitely interacting with our environment. So how do you think about brain waves and the meditative process?
Yeah, I love brainwaves.
We love brain waves.
Yeah, we love brainwaves. Again, it's just like a cheat sheet to fortify your practice and to have a better understanding of where you are at any given moment. So like you're saying, we're in beta most of our waking time from the time like there's a juicy point right when we wake up and right before we go to sleep that are really fun to play with in our practice. But then, after we wake up, once we've really like settled back into, oh yeah, I'm Kat, I'm in my bed and that's my window and this is my house. And, we start to reconstruct our reality like that, which happens pretty quickly. Then, we move about our day. We go through our routines. We're in our beta brainwave state. And that's great. We need our beta brainwave state to operate in the world. We need to be able to drive the car and, operate the things and turn on the blood. Like we need to do those things. And when we're here all the time, it's what is keeping us from transformation. It's what's inhibiting neuroplasticity. Or actually, I was listening to something today. It's like we're always neuroplastic. Like our brain is always in a state of neuroplasticity. It's just whether or not we're placing intention onto that. It's just
I
whether
think
or not.
yes, this is such a good point to put a little extra emphasis on that we didn't hit on before, which is that you're not only changing your brain when you're meditating. It's adjusting to your beliefs and your thoughts and your actions and your experiences all the time. The difference is with meditation and this work is that you're becoming more conscious of it and you're creating those pathways
Right, right.
yourself. Yeah.
You're kind of taking the reins back in that 20-minute session to be like, okay, there's all of this input all of the time affecting my neuroplasticity. And in this time, I take the reins back to place intention and choose where I'm placing that rewiring.
Yeah, the
So
responsibility that you're taking up and the creation. We talk a lot about you're creating the life that you want rather than being victim to it. And it totally starts with the brain.
yeah. So that's where we are most of the time. And then as we, I guess come back to present. So some breathing, we're lessening our frequency of the brain waves. So we're moving from beta to alpha, which is when we're in, more of a relaxed state, when we're painting or cooking or listening to music, or when we find ourselves often like this is equated more to flow state, right? Is that how you feel it?
Yeah, it's one version, I think, of flow state. It's interesting that, yeah, beta is when we're really engaged and we're active, and high beta when we're stressed. And then the way I think about alpha is the creative state. And so this is usually when you start to sink into your meditation and you're like, oh, okay, there's that space. And the thoughts are, maybe still there, but they're floating by you a little bit more easily. You're starting to notice some space. That's when you're entering alpha. And this is kind of a um, rather mystical story about Einstein, but and we don't have the actual data to confirm it, but apparently he had his brain waves measured at a lab when he was doing his equations, when he was thinking through something. And reportedly, he was in really deep alpha when he was doing his work, which I think, and even the way that he talks about his process is being very imaginative. And then from the kind of visual that he would get to the imaginative experience, the equations would come. And so I think that's such a it's not necessarily a meditation. You could maybe call it that, but it's an example of a state that you can go into that's just a very relaxed but aware brain. So you're relaxed but aware. So I thought that was kind of cool about Einstein.
That is cool. Einstein is a cool guy, I've heard.
He was just pretty rad. He
Yeah.
was tapped into something.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. So, watching a sunset or yeah, I guess for me that is kind of what feels like a little bit of that flow state for somebody where your inhibitions are just a little bit lowered. And if we're talking about meditation, it's right when you've sat down, you've started to breathe, you can notice that you're a little bit more settled. You can feel the earth beneath you. You're more grounded. You've most likely started to move into alpha. And I think just a caveat here. So when we're in beta, it's like there's a gatekeeper. Our conscious mind is on. There's a gatekeeper to our subconscious, and it regulates what goes in and out. We're operating mostly from our conscious mind. As we start to move deeper into alpha and then from alpha into theta, it's like that gatekeeper has fallen asleep. That gatekeeper's like left its station. And so we can go into the subconscious mind. We can go in and start going through all the drawers and opening things up. And that is why rewiring happens in the alpha, theta, these realms, delta, gamma, but mostly we're talking about theta and meditation because that gatekeeper of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind has taken a break. He's out to lunch. There's no longer someone being like, no, that's not true. The analytical mind can't come in and reason with whatever you're rewiring. And that's why it's so transformational because you're getting in there, you're working with the subconscious like as if it's putty and you get to be the one who decides what you're rewiring there. So you're as you drop deeper and deeper into meditation, theta is yeah, it's also it's that kind of right before you fall asleep. Is that more theta as well for you? What you think?
Yeah, yeah. I love that you're mentioning the subconscious mind because all of this neuroplasticity that we're talking about, a lot of this is accessed not through the analytical mind, but through the subconscious mind. And that's likely why we're seeing these impacts on the brain the way that we're seeing them is because we are moving beyond the analytical mind, beyond just the executive function. And so that's a huge, I mean, anybody who's meditated for a while knows that experience of moving beyond the what I love to call the linear, the logical. And you start to expand into, and we can talk about brainwaves and the mystical experience as you move into the subconscious mind and then into, we could call it the higher mind, the highest mind. And that can tend to happen, it seems like, as you move into theta. This is also why the yogis all recommend meditating not just in the morning, but as early into the morning, like 4:30 in the morning, is the
Yeesh.
apparent sweet spot.
Yeah.
But that's when your brain is pretty definitively in theta, if not delta, and so you have an increased capacity to become aware and then go into back into that brainwave state of theta, maybe even to delta. And sometimes when we fall asleep in meditation, like that's, I don't necessarily view that as a bad thing. You want to set yourself up so that you don't fall asleep, but you know that you're dancing in between those brainwave states. And then, we can kind of close here talking about my favorite brainwave state, which is gamma.
Yeah.
So there's something really surprising, I think, that happens. And we're just in the last few years understanding this by studying monks and highly experienced meditators that the base line of their brainwave states has a much higher operating foundation of gamma brainwaves than non-meditators or even more inexperienced meditators. They have a lot more gamma, and we're trying to figure out why. And we know that when they go into meditation and they have these mystical experiences, a lot of times it looks like they're in theta and in gamma. And gamma is just this really high, beyond beta frequency of the brain. And we can also see that there's a lot of different areas of the brain that are firing now instead of kind of separately, they're firing together. So we call that brain coherence. That multiple areas of the brain are now all activated at once. And we can tell from the experience from the person having the experience, the monk, or an experienced meditator, that they've been in a mystical experience or beyond the linear experience in this gamma brainwave state of just crazy high magnitudes. So that is the most interesting component for me when it comes to brainwave states. What do you think, Kat?
Yeah, when I think back to some of my, I guess the highlight reel of my meditation practice, some of the, yeah, most potent mystical experiences I have had, I, assume are in the gamma state. I can really only can attribute to being in the gamma state. And for me, they felt like they haven't been sustained for very long. I'll be deep, deep in meditation, and there'll be these spurts of elevation, these spurts of clarity. The way it sometimes feels in my body is I'll have like my eyes will start vibrating, like
Yeah.
I don't know if they're this way, horizontally or vertically, but they're vibrating behind my eyelids to the point
Yeah.
where I just have to kind of tell myself like let go and release into this experience. And it's often accompanied by, yeah, just either transporting my awareness outside of my body to the point where I feel like I'm levitating, or I see outside of my body, looking at my body. Um, but they're always these, yes, spurts of mystical experience. And then when I slowly come back down, I'm I'm left to kind of, integrate that, to wonder like,
Mm. What was that?
yeah, what was that?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what was that? And
The
there's always,
analytical mind comes back in. It's like, okay.
yeah, yeah. And always this, desire, this human nature to touch it again, this desire to, which is when this practice becomes addictive, like when you start to crave meditation every single day because it's your vehicle to these altered brainwave states, and thus vehicle to the mystical, vehicle to altered experiences. Tell me a little bit about your experience in gamma. I feel like every time you sit down, you come back to,
I
to the
always have
game in your
stories,
head.
y'all.
Yeah, yeah. And now that we're
So
talking
many
about it more,
stories.
every time Crystal sits down, she's in gamma.
Oh, I don't know. That would be fascinating to measure officially. Would be
Yeah.
very interesting. But I will say over the years, especially meditating every day for the last more than a decade, I have noticed over time, I wonder if I do drop into gamma pretty fast, um, or at least into like alpha theta. And I would say, even in the last year, the mystical experience or the transcendent state, um, where it's so fascinating because my connection to my body becomes much less. Like just
Mm-hmm.
the other day, I was meditating for about an hour and I didn't move at all during the meditation. And when I came back kind of into my body, not necessarily that I was astral traveling or anything, but I was just kind of my, I was somewhere else. I was non local, which I think the gamma brainwave state is a vehicle or a portal for that non local conscious experience. If consciousness, and we haven't got to it today, but we will,
Yeah.
if
Part two.
consciousness is, I know, part two, is non local, then I think what meditation is enabling you to do through these brainwave states of higher oscillation is to increase your capacity to be connected to the field through quantum states.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
what based on the current science, seems like that could be a pretty high possibility. And so through these higher oscillations of brain waves, gamma, brain coherence, heart coherence, now my consciousness is able to kind of go into this non-local experience. And that I think it's gamma. But when I come back into my body, I noticed like my leg was killing me. It was so interesting. It was such a reflection of like I wasn't aware of it because my consciousness was somewhere else. And so I
Yeah.
think that's what's really fascinating about this amazing transducer or antenna or whatever you want to call your brain. It is your vehicle
Yeah.
to travel and explore this reality. So, what a fun thing to explore.
Yeah, I have one. I'm curious. So I was meditating yesterday by the river and had an extremely potent meditation. I don't know how long I was there, but probably about 45 minutes, an hour. And I found myself in that place as we're talking about where I was suspended almost in like liminal space. Like my awareness was suspended. And I normally I'm very in touch with like, oh, my left leg's going numb at about like 25 minutes. And I knew that was happening, but I also couldn't feel it, right? And what happened is I would release into this space of expansion. And then not immediately, but once I'd been there for, you know, time kind of dissolves, but probably a few seconds, my analytical mind would kind of turn on, and be like, "Oh shit!" Like, like,
Totally.
like we're just
Yeah.
floating, like and then that would be the invitation to be like, "Yeah, I know. Okay, release again." But I'm curious if that happens to you because it's sustained in the way that my analytical mind doesn't take me back down, but it's this like awareness that comes on of just like, we're doing
We're doing
it.
we're
You know?
going. Where are we going?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then this like,
Yeah.
"I know we're doing it, sweetie. Okay, let's keep doing it."
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, I
It's this
totally
really
experienced
fun
this.
dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is part of meditation and for people who are getting into it or have been into it for a while. So good to remember this is that you're moving between these brainwave states throughout your
Mhm.
practice.
Yes,
So
yeah,
you could pop back in to beta and the analytical mind because yeah, it's I experience that, especially in longer meditations. I view the experience more as this like kind of wave, you're like touching it and then
yeah,
sometimes I get swept up into it, and the analytical mind is so far away that there's really, unless I'm consciously trying to come back, I'm off in the experience. I
yeah.
am the experience. And but other times, something we've talked about this a little bit of like you can feel this portal opening up, you can feel the gamma coming on, you can feel
Yeah.
the vibrations coming on, and then analytical mind comes in and it's like, not today. We're not going there.
Yeah,
And
totally.
the fear can come in, the unknown. The brain is wired for the known. And so
Yeah.
as you expand your consciousness, you're asking your brain to start to wire for the unknown, which is a big change. Um, so,
Yeah. I I think that's really helpful visualizing anyone who's, meditating, beginning, advanced, whatever, visualizing that whole experience as one that's oscillating between all of the brainwave states, you know, and giving yourself permission for that to be the experience because that's what it is. And that's, they're not meant to sustain gamma for 20 minutes or even theta necessarily for 20 minutes. But I do think what's so powerful about meditation, obviously, what we're talking about, but about SoulPod rituals is that we're so intentional about bringing us into that space of alpha slash theta using breath work, really um, taking you into that brainwave state first, and then we're addressing whether it be beliefs, paradigms, concepts. Then we're inviting a reorientation around it because, like we talked about, the gatekeeper to our subconscious is out to lunch. So then we're like, let's go in here and reorient. Let's go in here and play. And that's why I think such a beautifully structured practice like one on SoulPod, or you can find just any kind of meditation that really is intentional about bringing you there, dropping you in before taking you on the journey.
Yeah,
It's really
that's
powerful.
those rituals in SoulPod are certainly, to your point, constructed in a very intentional way for a
Mhm.
reason.
Right, right.
And even the reflection after meditation, however you like to reflect, whether you're writing in your journal, you're answering the prompt questions, your mind is in this very impressionable state after meditation. Just
Mhm.
like after sleep, as you go into meditation, there's an opportunity because of the brain waves that you're in that you can lay down those tracks of your new neural pathways more easily. So that's why it's so, I think, important after meditation not to just jump right back into your life and to take a moment, and you've left the analytical mind maybe a little bit and you're back in it. Okay, what did I learn? What dots can I connect in my prefrontal cortex? That's a really powerful and I think important way to develop your practice.
Yeah, I think I personally could be more intentional about that kind of spiritual hygiene because I notice when I drop right back into my life, there's almost like I'm almost more irritable because you're shifting channels back, you know? It's like you're shifting states of consciousness back, and so noises and the 3D reality is a little bit more confronting unless I take that time to integrate, which
Yeah.
I almost hadn't really put the experience together like that. And now I realize I'm like, that's probably why immediately after it takes me a minute because I'm still half in, half out. I'm half in a higher state of consciousness, half in this reality. So
Yeah.
yeah.
100%. You have to go easy on yourself after, especially if you've done a rather potent meditation and you've really gone there in your consciousness. Give yourself just, even if it's 5 minutes, a little bit of time before you jump back into the world. Allow it to settle. Yeah, allow those pathways to get a little bit more activated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of really good ground today. There will be more on the science of spirituality coming. We have so much more to chat about. But I hope that you all enjoyed the conversation, sending you lots of love to all the light beings out there. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, Kat.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Thank you for journeying with us today, light being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we want to invite you to explore the SoulPod app, where you can immerse yourself in daily lessons, guided meditations, and breath work to develop a soul nourishing daily ritual and tune back into your own inner guidance system. You can download SoulPod in the App Store or directly from the show notes to start your free trial today and awaken the ancient wisdom within you.